welcome to the business of story. I'm Park Howell, and today we are going to test your ability to use fiction. Essentially completely made up stories about a glorious future for you and your company. That, if you can get your people to buy into your totally made up story, how it can and even will materialize into reality before your very eyes. But it all starts with knowing how to tell that story, and that all starts with understanding and expertly using the ABT, the and, but, therefore foundational narrative framework in all of your leadership and business storytelling. The ABT is where all-powerful and persuasive fictional and non-fictional organizational storytelling begins. And you learning the ABT starts with either of our two short online courses, tutorials really, called the ABTs of Selling or the ABTs of Branding. You can find both of them at bit.ly/ABT courses. That's bit.ly/ABT courses. Because let's face it, you gotta understand the magic if you're going to cast the spell of storytelling to grow your people, ignite your revenue, and achieve the impact in the world you seek. And that mostly starts by getting people to buy into a fictional story that you will soon make reality. You know what one of my all-time favorite books is about storytelling? It's Yuval Noah Harari's book called Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind. In an interview with Smithsonian Magazine, when asked, is there a unique trait linking all human beings, Harari said this, quote, "The truly unique trait of Sapiens is our ability to create and believe fiction. All other animals use their communication system to describe reality. We use our communication system to create new realities. Of course, not all fictions are shared by all humans, but at least one has become universal in our world, and that is money. Dollar bills have absolutely no value except in our collective imagination, but everybody believes in the dollar bill." End quote. One of my main takeaways from Sapiens is that we storytelling monkeys are the most aggressive, invasive species ever known to the planet Earth, precisely because we are the only beings that we know of who organize, plan, and act using storytelling as our principal guide. And those stories typically start as fictions, as we try to organize and inspire the people around us to, quote, buy into our way of thinking, our belief of what a brighter tomorrow might look like, our vision for the future. I always chuckle when someone inquires about one of my business of story masterclasses or mastery courses for their leaders, and they tell me, look, these people are leaders, not salespeople, so we don't want to cover much in selling through storytelling. Well, spoiler alert. Everyone, including your leaders, is in sales. Even if you're not hawking a product or service, if you're communicating to an audience, then your goal is to get them to buy into your way of thinking and your way of doing. But if you're not using fictional storytelling to lead your people into a brighter future, then you're doing a disservice to them, yourself, your organization, and, well, the communities you hope to serve. Because according to Harari, the Sapiens' secret to success is large-scale, flexible cooperation. And guess what? That all starts with the stories we tell one another. I've not met in 350-plus episodes of the Business of Story a guest who has used the idea of leadership through fictional storytelling to greater effect than the founder of Blinds.com, Jay Steinfeld.
You had said earlier in our conversation that I was a fiction writer. When I was writing that, it wasn't fiction to me. I guess it's a paradox because I say that's the future and I'm not sure we can do it. And I'm not even sure necessarily how we're going to get there, but it's so compelling we're going to figure it out. really deep down, it wasn't fiction. I believed it.
Jay founded and was the CEO of Blinds.com, the world's #1 online window covering retailer. He bootstrapped it in 1996 for just $3,000 from his Bel Air, Texas garage. And Home Depot went on to acquire Blinds.com in 2014. Jay remained as its CEO and later joined the Home Depot online leadership team. He stepped away from these roles in early 2020 and now teaches entrepreneurship at Rice University's Jones Graduate School of Business. Plus, he's increased his involvement on numerous private company boards and currently serves as director of the public company Masonite. He also supports a number of different charities. Jay is an Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year and has earned a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Houston Technology Center. Active as an industry speaker on topics including corporate culture, core values, how to scale a startup, and disruption, he has more than 100 published articles and writes a column for Inc.com. Jay also sings in the same barbershop quartet of which he's been a part of for nearly 50 years. You got to have an outside interest, right? Maybe kind of a side hustle there. He lives with his wife, Barbara, in Houston, Texas, and has 5 children and 7 grandchildren who he proudly refers to as his 7 startups. Of course, Jay's book, Lead from the Core, The 4 Principles for Profit and Prosperity, is a Wall Street Journal bestseller, and we are going to cover those 4 principles of profit and prosperity today through the power of fictional storytelling. Please welcome to the Business of Story, Jay Steinfeld. Jay, welcome to the show.
Mark, it's great to be here. Thank you.
Let's see, who do I have to thank? That has got to be Mr. Brian Burkhart over at Square Planet. He and I were chatting about a month ago, and he said, you've got to see if you can get Jay on your show because you were on his podcast, and he was just going over and over again about what a great storyteller you are, in addition to an amazing entrepreneur and leader. And so today we are going to explore that intersection between entrepreneurship, leadership, and the power of story to help amplify the impact. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Park.
Now, you took a company from your garage in Texas, Blinds.com. It became Blinds.com, but selling blinds into like a world, power, a giant beater. I mean, Home Depot came in and bought you, and they're a great company, I know, because I've had a chance to work with them, teaching them business of story training to their sales teams internally, and they're really great people to work with. So you landed at a marvelous place, and here you are now teaching at MIT and doing all kinds of amazing things, and you still got a big career ahead of you. Did you ever see this all winding up like it has for you and your family?
Absolutely not. What I had started with had no vision whatsoever. I wish I could tell you that I told myself a story as to what this big future compelling vision was going to be, but it was really just an experiment. It was just thinking that I had this store that I owned with my wife, and I heard about something called the World Wide Web back in 1993, the year before Amazon even started, and thought, I'll give it a try. I'll run an experiment and see what this World Wide Web thing is. And I didn't even sell anything online at first. Eventually, I started selling out of my garage, out of my van, and one thing led to another until 2014. We sold to Home Depot and stayed on 7 years and lived to tell it all.
Can you give our listeners a cliff version of the founding of your company and the selling to Home Depot? I listen to Guy Raz and How I Built This all the time. And Jay, I'm thinking, man, you should be on his show because you have all the same story arc that all of those entrepreneurs have of starting something very basic, running, going into down alleys, blind alleys. You don't know what's going on with the World Wide Web. You teach yourself how to do this. You have highs, you have lows, you have almost going out of business, and then you finally reach the finish line. So we'll save that for your appearance on his show because I'm sure that's coming up soon. But could you give us the cliff notes, and then let's talk about how story helped you carry this company all the way through?
Well, sure, Park. When I started, I had this store with my wife, Naomi. And going online, we wanted to make buying blinds and shades a no brainer. So we called it No Brainer Blinds. And we were first online. So we were the world's most popular and trusted online source for blinds because we were the only online source for blinds. So that was part of the story. We also, because it was run out of my house, which was at 4815 Pine Street, well, that's a residence address, and nobody would believe that was a real business. So I changed the address to No Brainer Blinds, One Brainer Tower, Houston, Texas. And people thought it was this giant skyscraper. And I remember going to Atlanta once, and one of my competitors, Maurice Neiman, is the founder of Blinds Galore in San Diego, he said, "Jay, One Brainer Tower, how big is that?" And I told Maurice, "You'd be surprised." And it was just my house.
Oh,
But I
did the
received
postman
emails.
did the postman shoot you looks, Jay? Like, what are you doing,
Absolutely.
man?
He told me, "You can't do that. You can't change your address." But actually, I was in Bel Air, Texas, which is a tiny little suburb outside of Houston, and there's one post office. So he knew where all the homes were, and he kept delivering me my mail at One Brainer Tower, including most of the money that I received, because at that time, people were afraid to use credit cards online, and almost all my sales were by check that were mailed to my house to One Brainer Tower.
I
So
love that.
over time, I was taking sales out of my car. I'd pull off the side of the road, and I'd have this giant brick of a phone, and they'd actually call into the showroom first, and they'd say, "All of our customer service representatives are busy," because I was the only customer service representative, and I was at people's homes or between those appointments. So I'd get the call from my showroom manager, pull off the side of the road with my order pads, calculator, a price list, call them back. There was no caller ID at the time, so they didn't know it was coming from my personal phone. And I would just talk to them and make the sale, write it up on my order pad, fax it into the showroom, and they'd run it through one of those big credit cards, where you slide it across. And that's how it all started. Eventually, we needed an office, and there was a close by office at the end of a dark, smelly, disgusting alley, 800 square foot office with no windows. And you had to walk through this alley that had rats in it and rat traps. It was disgusting. It really was disgusting. But that's what we did, because it was cheap and it was close to my drapery shop. And eventually we grew out of that too, and hired 7 employees. And then we eventually had 500 employees. And well, we were hoping to do just one sale a day. Or I remember saying, "God, if we could just do $5,000 a week, we'd have it made." And now we're doing over $1 billion. And that's crazy. No, I didn't understand that that's what the vision was going to be at all. Who would?
But you had this inherent vision. I mean, taking your single, level ranch home out of Bel Air, Texas, and making it One Brainer Tower. So you were designing this story about what you could be. And I know that you were using that to help your customers feel more confidence in the size and scope of your organization. But not most people wouldn't do that. Is that something that just kind of innately came to you, that sort of that puffer fish storytelling of let's make ourselves look bigger than we actually are because we are eventually going to get there?
Well, I had no doubt that if I could envision something, I could probably get there, or I was going to absolutely do my best to get there. And usually I was right. There were very few things that if I had imagined them, that they ended up happening, much to everybody's dismay for competitors and surprise to most people who believe that selling blinds online was a harebrained idea. Nobody would do that because they couldn't see it, they couldn't touch it, They had to measure themselves and install it themselves. I mean, who was going to do that? There was no market for that, really. But that was what intrigued me. It was exciting to try something new. It was exciting to do something that nobody had ever done. But as far as the one brainer tower idea, I kind of stole that from the Car Talk people. I don't know if you know, on NPR there was a
Oh, yeah. Frick and
radio
Frack?
show called Click and Clack, the Tapper Brothers,
Oh, that's
and
right.
they
The
had
click and
something
clack.
called Puzzler Tower, where you had to send in these riddles that they created during the show. And once I was thinking about uh, one their Puzzler Tower, I thought, I'll just call mine Brainer Tower. I'll call it One Brainer Tower. So it was really just kind of being irreverent the way they were and saying, I don't want a typical business. I want to have a little fun. I want it to be tongue in cheek. And it was really just kind of that. It was being more playful than anything. One of the things that I believe as a leader is, yes, business is very serious, but you can't take yourself seriously and you have to have a little fun. In fact, there's no reason that you can't have fun. And One Brainer Tower was just a way of having some fun. And I know that every time, in fact, as I'm thinking about it now, I'm smiling because every time I received an envelope that had a check in it to One Brainer Tower, it made me smile. And it still does. It's just so fun to think about what that was like in creating One Brainer Tower and getting checks.
Oh, that would be fun. How did you use that same sort of story skill to get your people to see what you were envisioning for the future? So, for instance, as you were going into the World Wide Web, and just as you said, who's going to do their own measuring? Who's going to buy something without touching it? Who's going to install it on their own? How did you get your people over all of those years to buy into some of what they may have thought were harebrained ideas that actually worked out for you?
Well, admittedly, at the beginning, I didn't have that vision. I didn't understand storytelling at all. And it was a limitation for me. It wasn't until I understood that the things that I was trying to do were all inside my head. And I needed to tell other people about it. I had the idea that we weren't just going to be selling blinds, but we would be selling multiple hard to buy, complex configurable products, like maybe custom sprinkler systems, custom chairs and tables, and a lot of other things. But almost everybody in the company didn't understand it. I understood it, but I was not a good storyteller. And as best I could tell, it was all conceptual and people couldn't connect the dots. So, one of the things I did was I created a vision document that was written as if it had been written in the future, looking retrospectively back on what we had become. And it showed what our campus looked like, and it showed where our offices were, and what our revenue was, and what core values we had used, and all the different people that were involved in generating some crazy revenue number and some crazy number of employees. It was really directional. I didn't use a spreadsheet or the finance department to try to figure out what those numbers would really be. It was a story. It was a story about the future. We even described very, very carefully uh, about what the campus looked like, with fountains and walkways and how pets were throughout the campus. People would say, so when are we going to have those fountains? I said, no, those weren't really going to be fountains. But, I eventually that didn't even work. So I just say, yeah, we're going to have fountains one day. And people believed that. And it wasn't that I was lying. I just wanted to show this is what we really could be if we all get on board and think of what that future could be. And guess what? That vision document was used to attract the best people. When people came in and interviewed, we showed everybody the vision document. And they went, wow, this is a great place. And we were able to get people that we never would have been able to get because of that vision, because of that story that we told, at prices or at salaries and compensation much lower than the competitors that we had, like Shell. and Chevron and all these giant oil companies in Houston that we were competing with. Lots of engineering companies that would pay big money. They would accept less money because they were part of a story and they felt that they could become part of the vision, that they could impact their own lives, that they could control their lives, they could control the story, they could be part of that story and go home and feel like they had done something significant, something consequential, because they were a consequential component of the story. Now, yes, they could have made more money someplace else, but what kind of story is that? Honey, I'm making a lot of money, but I hate my job. Here is, I love my job. I have no idea what I could become. And it's so fun. And I am becoming a better person because I'm part of blinds.com. That's a story that people want. That's a story that people are excited about. And that's how we were able to attract people and why our turnover rate was only 8%. People didn't want to leave. Even when we sold the company to Home Depot, we had virtually no one leave for 3 years after the sale because we were all, including myself, staying on 7 years, because we all had that vision and we didn't want to lose it. And we wanted to do it. And I didn't want to leave until I had accomplished that vision. And I didn't leave because it took us 7 years to get there. And once we did, I felt, okay, we have now achieved that story that we told ourselves 15 years ago. We've done it. And there was nothing left to do in that story. Now it was time to create new stories. And that's when I became not retired, but rewired, which is, I guess, is another story that I told myself.
Well, Jay, really what you are, in addition to a storyteller, entrepreneur, and leader, is you were a fictional author, because that vision piece, that story of what the future is going to look like, is pure fiction until you can get your people to live into it, and then you deliver on that vision and you turn it into fact. It really is fascinating when I think about Yuval Harari's book, Sapiens. Have you read that book?
No, but I've heard about it, and many people have said I should read it.
Oh, it's fabulous. And he talks about, of course, the core superpower of Homo sapiens is our ability to organize, act, think, plan in story. There's no other organism out there, and that uses story the way Homo sapiens do, and that's why we've become the most aggressive, invasive species ever known to humankind anyway. But essentially, you demonstrated that in sharing that vision statement of saying, here's what tomorrow is going to look like for us all here, but here's what we need to do today in order to get there. Therefore, let's do this, this, and this, and to attract people in and have them buy in, not from the dollar perspective, but from the context of story and what it meant to their life. I mean, I just think that is enormously powerful. Have you taught that to other companies and leaders, and have you seen that work in other places?
It absolutely works, and I saw it at Zappos, I saw it at Google. At any company that has built itself into something far bigger than what the numbers would show is because the people had these visions. People had stories that were compelling, that people wanted to join that story and be part of it. They wanted to be a character in the story. And I think that's the only way you can really get people. Well, I shouldn't say this. There is another story, and I don't like it. The other story is, we're going to make a lot of money. Now, there's nothing wrong with that story, but all you're going to get are mercenaries when you tell that story. You're going to get people that all they care about is money, and if they get a better offer somewhere else, you're going to lose them. And you're not going to really create something consequential. You're going to create money, but that's not true happiness to me. True happiness is creating something out of nothing. Yeah, it could be money, but I don't believe you're going to get the best people when all you're doing is promoting money, as opposed to doing something about self-empowerment, about changing the world, changing civilization, creating a legacy, creating your own unilateral control over your life, creating teams, creating things of significance and consequence. That's what at least drove me. And I can't say that that's the story that everybody should tell themselves, but I've seen it work for so many other people, and it definitely worked for me.
Jay, can you take us to a moment or two where you used stories to help maybe overcome an anti-story? And this could be an anti-story prospect was telling themselves about you, or even a colleague telling themselves about where the company was going, and you knew you had to actually share a better story to help overcome that anti-story.
Um, I'm not sure I've got one like that comes to mind instantly, but there's a story that when we were selling the company, that we had some institutional investors later in our development, in our trajectory, and these institutional investors were very serious, and they created great spreadsheets and decks, and it all looked good, like you would expect from serious investment banker types. Well, when we were trying to tell a story to prospective buyers like Lowe's and Home Depot's, we created a story showing what we had envisioned for the stores, and we used these cartoon images to create it. There were no numbers, it was just images of what we would create. And at the end of the story, in the case of Lowe's, we had Home Depot in the doghouse. Literally, it was to build custom doghouses as an example. And Lowe's and Home Depot ended up in a Lowe's doghouse. Well, when we presented that, the investment banker said, "That is unprofessional. You can't do that. That makes no sense." And we're thinking, "No, that's great storytelling. This is going to be really good." And they pleaded with us, "Please don't use it." Well, of course, we used it, and we got a standing ovation, a literal standing ovation in the meeting to see Home Depot in the doghouse. Well, now, a few weeks after that, Home Depot shows up. Well, we can't show Home Depot in the doghouse, so we had our artists change the end of the story, putting Lowe's in the doghouse. Standing ovation again. In fact, they both loved it because it's not like Home Depot and Lowe's are friends. They're enemies. And we think that was such a fun thing to do that one of our meeting rooms is called the Doghouse. So not only would you have the stories there, but we have extended the Doghouse legend into so that everybody can be in there. And we actually have the slides from that deck showing Lowe's in the doghouse, of course, because Home Depot ended up buying us. And we have stuffed animals of dogs and dog bowls and dog food, and it looks like a doghouse from the outside. We had this production company create it. It's kind of fun. Again, it's just having fun. It's just amusing ourselves. But that's what you do. You tell stories. It worked, and then you keep that story going as long as you can, so that as new employees come in, they say, "Why is that a doghouse?" And then you can tell the story again.
It's a story prompt, and that whole anecdote really underscores to me the interesting part of here you've got that venture capital guy, gal in the room, and they are completely locked in their left logic, reasoned thinking brain, numbers. You got to look professional, which means you got to be stiff. And just given the fact, it's almost like you've got to stand up there like a spreadsheet. And then you are on the other side of it saying, no, actually, I need to engage them emotionally and get them into the context of my story. And then we'll roll out the numbers and show them that what I'm telling them and what they're feeling can actually play out. So it's flipping that whole concept. Do not lead with logic and reason. Lead with emotion. And then logic and reason will follow.
Well, one of the things that we made a big mistake when we were looking for that institutional investment, we led with numbers. And the first 7 PE firms that we presented to rejected us, all 7. Well, I read this book by Peter Guber called Tell to Win, about how you can create a more compelling story that's defined and targeted for the person you're presenting to. And once I read that and once I started doing that, the next 7 got term sheets from all of them, because we were leading with numbers and we thought our numbers were good. And they were. But what we didn't do was show what the future could be so that what they could be part of that story. And they knew that there was a lot of upside. So we changed it so to make sure that we led with this idea about being the best at the world at selling complex, customizable, hard to buy products. And that unleashed a much bigger market that we could do, which was also of interest to Home Depot and Lowe's, because we could take that technology and apply it to all these other product categories. And look, sometimes you don't even need words, and when you want to lead by emotion. I remember when the institutional prospective investor came in for the first time, and they were walking down. Actually, they were walking through an alley that we recreated that looked just like that other alley that we had originally back in the day. We recreated the alley indoors so that everybody who walked through the front door would have to also walk through the alley and live through that story that we had done ourselves when we first started the company. So as they walked through the alley, there was this kickboxing dummy, and it had a Home Depot apron on it. And all I did as we passed it is I punched it, strong overhand right, just punched it, didn't say a word, just kept walking. And that was me saying, we hate the competition and we're going to be viscerally strong in destroying them. I didn't say anything. All I did was punch it. And actually, I had taken boxing lessons for 14 years, so I knew how to throw a punch. And I didn't know how impactful that was until after we sold to Home Depot, where that investment banker came back to me and said, when I saw you punch that, I knew you were serious. And so that sometimes you don't even need to say anything. You just punch a dummy.
Well, what I love about these anecdotes is they continue to proof out points that I try to make in all of my shows about how powerful storytelling is, especially to those skeptical listeners that may be like thinking, Jay Park, that storytelling stuff is a soft skill. I need, the hard skills. I need the numbers. And it proves out a point. Like today when I was on LinkedIn and I noticed that you had shared a blog post of mine that I wrote several years ago called 10 Screenwriting Tips Every Brand Storyteller Should Know. And this was on the heels of me attending Robert McKee's famous 4-day story screenwriting course over at the LAX Sheridan. And I was so mesmerized by the man and his wisdom that I wrote this article about here's how screenwriters approach storytelling and how you can absolutely bridge it over to the business world. And in it, and one of my favorite quotes that I still use all the time is he stood up there on stage speaking to all these screenwriters and said, never make this mistake. Always remember that the conscious mind is simply the PR department for the subconscious mind where all of the real decisions are being made. And that's what you're doing. You are reaching into and popping in the nose the subconscious mind when you were firing up emotion in those stories. And then that conscious mind, the logic reason brain, will come along for the ride, not the other way around. And I often ask my guests, and you prove it out again here, Jay, what is the first syllable to the word numbers?
Numb.
Exactly. The numbers have no impact on us storytelling monkeys unless we place them in the context of an emotional story first. Then they start making sense to us. I just think you were proving this point out for me very well today. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. I don't know if you're familiar with the book, The Happiness Hypothesis by Jonathan Haidt.
Yeah, I had Jonathan on my show a couple of years ago. That was the first book of his that I read and absolutely loved it.
Well, yeah, he talks about this story about when you ride an elephant, you think you're in control of the elephant, but the elephant's really in control of you. You just don't know it. And you can pull on his ear and move a little to the right. But basically, if the elephant wants to go someplace, they will. And that's your subconscious, the elephant. You just believe that you're controlling it, but there's so much under the surface that's actually creating all these decisions for you. And it's good to know that, especially as you're making stories and for others, and as you're actually making decisions for yourself. You just have to be a little bit more conscious and present with your own decision making to know that stories are affecting you just as you are using stories to affect others.
Yeah, have you heard, because you're so big on visioning and you've done it so well, I want you to touch a bit on the brochure that you created as if the company were 5 years down the road. But before that, I don't know if you follow Jordan Peterson at all or see what he's up to, but he's got a program called the Future Authoring Program that you can go online. I think it's $35 or something. It's pretty inexpensive. But what it does is gets you to write down and be your own author, essentially, and write what that future looks like, just like you did with your company. What does that future look like? And how can you live into it? I just think I'm in the throes of doing that right now, and I find it's really powerful.
Well, I think you had said earlier in our conversation that I was a fiction writer. When I was writing that, it wasn't fiction to me. I know it was fiction, and I guess it's a paradox because I say that's the future, and I'm not sure we can do it. And I'm not even sure necessarily how we're going to get there, but it's so compelling, we're going to figure it out. But really, deep down, it wasn't fiction. I believed it. I didn't believe that I was actually creating a fictional future, but I was creating what was present because it felt so real in my mind. And when people were in my presence as I was talking about it, they knew that authentically it wasn't coming from me as BS. I really did believe it. And they couldn't help but feel my passion and my authenticity, even at creating something which, admittedly, I said might not happen, but I was so sure that it would, that they would be more than willing to jump on and help me get there. In fact, they would do things far beyond what I would even ask because they were so pumped by it themselves and they wanted to do it. And they would hire great people too. And basically, once you have a vision and you have people who want to be builders and who want to create and want to explore and can deal with ambiguity, which is not actually easy to do, but when you do it, you just sit back and they will create the actions that are necessary to get there. So as a leader, the less that you exert on people creates the less influence you exert on people creates more influence because all they're doing is going towards something that you've jointly decided is a great place to be. And that is such an easy way to lead because you're doing nothing. You're really not doing any of the work, but you're just putting all the pieces together to make sure that the people are doing the work. And it's beautiful and it's exciting and it's satisfying and gratifying. I don't know, does that make sense?
It does. It makes sense. And Jay, you strike me as a very natural, intuitive storyteller. I mean, we all are intuitive storytellers, but you seem like it comes to you a little bit easier. And yet you said at the beginning of your career in buildingblinds.com, you weren't a good storyteller. You were leading with the numbers and so forth. What did you do or where did you turn to start really building your storytelling chops?
Well, by trade, I was a CPA. My education, I got a BBA in accounting and worked for one of the big accounting firms, KPMG, Pete Marwick. So it was black and white binary numbers. Uh, Unfortunately, after I'd been married for 25 years, in August of 2002, the year after I started going full time online, my wife, Naomi, died of breast cancer. And it was painful. It's actually still painful. I'm still sad. But it caused me to be more introspective about what makes me tick. And all the things that I know today, I didn't know. I wasn't conscious of it. if I was competent in any way, I was unconsciously competent. I didn't know what I knew. But through introspection and reading books like the happiness hypothesis, which I mentioned earlier, and Man's Search for Meaning and philosophical books, I started purposely trying to figure out what makes me tick. And as I started to understand that, my true, authentic core values and my DNA, not what I aspired to do or what I aspire to be, but actually that when I woke up in the morning, this is what I do. I evolve and I experiment and I express myself and I try to have fun. That's what I do. Those were the core values that were imparted to the company. And naturally, once I made that discovery about myself, that realization, and I wanted to make sure that it was embedded into the entire company, specifically into its people, and that we hired the right people, it necessarily required me to tell that story. So I learned to do it because it needed to be done. And I'm not sure how I did it. I know that I studied singing, and I sing in a barbershop quartet. And when you sing in a quartet, you tell a story. There's interpretation, and there's stage presence, and there's facial expressions, and there's all these different things that you do. And that's telling a story by music and by song. And so maybe some of that training paid off.
And
But
this
I
led
will
to
say
your
that it was just a conscious decision that I had to get better. So I would learn by reading constantly, constantly reading. So if I needed to present better, I would learn how to present. Remember when I was having a problem telling my story about the 7 term sheets where I had failed, I read on how do you present better? How do you tell stories better and tell to win? And I learned. It was kind of a just-in-time learning. So I've learned about myself through a deliberate need so that I could continue to evolve and get better and help everybody around me get better. And you can only do that when you can tell a story. And look, you can tell, it's like your kids, you can tell them what to do, but unless there's some compelling reason for themselves, it's going to be really hard. I mean, you can't just say, you do it because I'm your dad. Well, I probably said that a bunch of times too. But you can't tell your employees, you do it because I'm your boss. Well, they'll do it, but that's all they're going to do. They're not going to do more than what you say. They're not going to even create work for themselves that's better than the work that you might have created for them, unless they were compelled by some story and understanding as to where they would end up.
Well, as dads and moms out there, we have all fallen into that trap of just do it this way because. And you're right, unless you can paint that brighter future and find out what's really of interest to your audience and what they want out of life, then it's hard to get them to act. So your storytelling chops have obviously grown a great deal in that. They're very representative in your new book, Lead from the Core. Frank Blake, the former CEO of Home Depot and the current chairman of Delta Airlines, writes on your cover, great advice, terrific storytelling, and very human. So in your book, I've got it. I've read through it. I love it. And the stories are so much fun to read because there's a moral to all of them, something that we can all relate to. And in a lot of cases, we've been there. We've been in your shoes in a different realm, but we can completely relatable. You talk about in your book the 4 principles for profit and prosperity. Can we quickly jump through those 4 principles? Because it sounds like everything you've learned has really come down to these 4 things.
I believe they have. And all of what I'm about to tell you, which seems so succinct and easy to say, is not what I understood when I first started. When I first tried to be more introspective and understand, I came up with 3. And 1 turned out to be absolutely wrong. But I'm not going to take you through that. Here's the thumbnail view. There's 4 E's, I call them. 1 is to evolve continuously. Well, that's obvious. You adapt or die. But it's not just about you evolving, but it's about, as a leader, your job is to help everybody around you evolve and for them your employees to know that they have to evolve, and their responsibility is to help everybody around them evolve, so that you have this evolution that's autonomous. Excellence just happens because people are getting better necessarily, which means your customer will get better, your company will get better, every process gets better. Well, everything gets better. I could go on and on that. The second is, in order to evolve, you have to take chances or experiment. The second E, experiment without fear of failure. Well, I'm risk averse. So you'd say, well, how do you say experiment without fear of failure and that you're risk averse? Well, it's because I look at asymmetric risk and look at what is the big upside versus a small downside. And if I can live with that small downside, there really is nothing to fear. And therefore, we would continuously experiment, furiously experiment. We had a list of hundreds of experiments that we would rank, and we would not be fearful of that. Here's a story that we told on, well, let's go back to the evolutions first. We had this big whiteboard where people would write on it what they're doing in their personal lives to evolve. Like, I am evolving to try to quit smoking, to be more a patient father, to be a more patient driver, to lose weight, to run a marathon, things like that. Learn how to fly a plane. And every 2 weeks, we would erase it and people would put more things on there. So they're now being accountable to the stories that they were not only telling themselves, but the stories they were telling to everybody in the company, that they evolve and they are proud of evolving. And maybe they will, maybe they won't, but they're going to be accountable to people. And that told a story to anybody who was walking in that building. Wow, these people are serious about evolving. Look what they're doing. And they're publicly proclaiming this. Well, we did the same thing with experimentation. We had 2 giant test tubes. They were 5 foot tall and about 12 or 15 inches wide. And in one test tube, we put some marbles for all the experiments that worked. Well, it only was about 20% full. In the other test tube, all the experiments that did not work, it was full. It was full of marbles. So every time people came across, they'd see this story that we were telling ourselves and to everyone. We are going to experiment, and we know that most of the experiments that we try will not work. And we're proud of it. And because we take chances with these experiments, asymmetric chances, that we are proudly going to be able to evolve and do things that people said, Blinds.com, you can never do it. You don't have the smarts, you don't have the money, you don't have the people. Well, how did this small little band of people with very little money and theoretically no smarts be able to beat Home Depot and Lowe's and Amazon? Well, it was because of this story that we were saying about ourselves, which was true. We will evolve and we will experiment. And the third E is to express yourself. We want data to be able to make decisions. We want people to say, Jay, I take exception with what you're saying. If you say we're going to get here, but you're doing this, how does that get us closer? To me, it puts us further away. Boy, when somebody would say that to me, I'd go, awesome. Whether I agreed with them or not, it was still awesome that they were willing to speak up. And then they'd say, hey, why don't we try this too? And they would do it in a way that was their authentic voice. So they didn't feel like they had to say just to be a yes person to me or to anyone else. We wanted vigorous debate, and we got it. And therefore, people felt that they were in control of their lives. So now we had people being themselves, speaking up, being a character in the story, and being able to experiment and evolve to become better than they ever believed possible, which was the actual mission or purpose, I should say, of Blinds.com. The purpose of Blinds.com was to help people become better than what they ever believed possible. Now, that's a story. That's a story that people want. And we believed it. We gave them personal development. We gave them the time to develop. We gave them an authentic voice. We spent money on them. We asked them, what do you want in your life? What story do you have in your personal life that may differ from ours? And how can we participate in your personal story? Do you want to work here in 5 years, or do you want to be a CEO someplace? Or do you just want to work for a few more years and then whatever? By asking people what their story is, which may not be aligned with yours, it actually is, because they stay longer with you when they know that you are supporting them to help them become better than they ever believed possible and to help them achieve their story. And they stay way longer than they even expect because they get there faster and better because you are supporting them. Now, ultimately, they go off and they start their own company. Nothing wrong with that, because they were going to do that anyway. You just allow them to take those building skills and apply them to your business while they learn to do it. And as a result, I mean, what's wrong with developing people and let them go off and do something else and feel like you actually empowered them and gave them the skills to do it? That's also a good story for your own brand, because you've got all these disciples now. I mean, you hear about these head coaches that have these assistant coaches that go on and lead all these other teams. What a great brand for that leader who's developed all these other leaders. That's generosity, and having a thought of how you support other people, how you can be generous with other people, how you're bringing humanity back into the world and into your own life. That's a great place to be. And then look, the next and fourth E is enjoy. If you haven't figured it out by now, this is fun for me. I enjoy evolving and doing things that have never been done, trying things even if it doesn't work, building teams and leading people to something that's much bigger than ourselves. Yes, we had foosball tables and shuffleboard, and we celebrate a lot, and we ate a lot of cake. But true enjoyment for us was creating that story, working our butts off. And even if we got halfway there, it's still a lot further than we had gotten had we not told us that big, compelling story in the first place. But we actually usually did get there. Now, not everything worked out. There was a lot of things that we wanted to do, and we thought they would, and they didn't. But it didn't get in our way because we were so energized by the end game that nothing actually could get in our way, because it was just a blip. It was just something that, oh, well, it didn't happen. Now, how can we do it? What can we do now? So all of this about evolving, experimenting is written about in my book, Lead from the Core. And there's a lot more stories on and how people can apply it to their own lives. Oh, another story we tell people about expressing themselves. When we have these all hands meetings called SAJs, and all new employees introduce themselves, telling a story about themselves. And they either have to tell a joke, sing a song, or dance. And they know this going in, and they're fearful and dreading that day where they've got to stand in front of hundreds of people and do that, no matter if they're the biggest introvert or not. But they do it, and they come out on the other side so happy that they did. They have expressed themselves to a very high degree, higher than they'd ever done before, and they feel like they're kind of part of the team now. And it's sometimes tender, sometimes it's funny, sometimes it is embarrassing, but it's mostly fun, and it's all in good cheer, and everybody thinks it's a hoot. And again, it's enjoying ourselves and expressing for the purpose of all being together to help us become the best we can be.
So the four principles: evolve, experiment, express, and enjoy has helped you go from no-brainer blinds out of your van and garage in Bel Air, Texas, to a billion-dollar-blind.com's business. Do I have that right?
Yes, you do. And part of Home Depot integrating what we're doing into 2,200 stores, 500,000 people, tens of millions of customers, so that the work that we've done has been influential to so many people. That's actually what's so crazy about all this, is that we're impacting other people as well as ourselves.
Just amazing. Jay, where can people learn more about you and your work and get your book?
Well, the book is available everywhere. It was a Wall Street Journal bestseller, so wherever you think you might want to buy a book, it'll be there. But you can also connect with me on LinkedIn or at my website, jsteinfeld.com.
That's awesome. Lead from the Core, the 4 Principles for Profit and Prosperity. It's an amazing book. And thank you so much for coming on the show today. And a special big thanks for writing this book and giving us your wisdom, your wit, your storytelling to help us all become just a little bit better leaders in our lives. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Park. It's been fun, and I hope it's been valuable to at least somebody, because my goal is, for success, is being in the process of getting better, not just obtaining anything. And if somebody got a little bit better, then I guess you and I have both been successful.
That's what it's all about, you know. And again, I'll go back to my Jordan Peterson reference. He makes a point of saying, stop comparing yourself to others. Just compare yourself to yourself from yesterday. And are you 1% better than you were yesterday? How did you level yourself up? Your book, I think, is a step in that right direction.
Thank you, Park.
And thank you all for listening to this edition of The Business of Story. If you like what you heard, share this. Share this episode with your leadership, with your boss, with maybe a colleague, friend, family member, whomever, that you feel like that they could level themselves up a little bit with the 4 principles for profit and prosperity. Just so fascinating. And the ability to guide people using those principles through the power of story. You'll get a ton out of Jay's new book, Lead from the Core. If I can be of service to you, come on over to the Business of Story. If you have yet to take your ABTs of selling and or ABTs of branding quick online courses, check them out over at businessofstory.thinkific.com. We've had hundreds of people going through them recently, and the feedback I've been getting has been blowing me away. So as Jay says, when you're out there actually helping people and leveling them up as we do through the power of story, man, there's nothing like it. There's no paycheck that is going to feel more positive than that positive impact you're making and that input you get from people out there. So check them out if you haven't tried them yet, businessofstory.thinkific.com. And be sure to join us again next Monday when we will have another story artist right here for you like Jay. And until then, remember that the most potent story you ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make it a great one. Thanks so much for listening.